My name is Ashna Kumar. I am a history graduate from Vivekanand College, Delhi University. Post that, I pursued my post graduation in modern Indian history from Jawaharlal Nehru University. After that, I've been preparing for UPSC, and currently I am an research intern at the Ministry of Culture. First of all, it's an absolute honor to be here today at the GSTS platform, and I would begin by expressing my gratitude to the GSTS team for encouraging young scholars to share their research. I'm truly grateful to be part of this journey. Moreover, I would also like to extend my sincere appreciation to the guest of honor, Dr. Rishikesh. It is a privilege to have you today with us. So, my topic for the discussion or the talk today is the 1918 pandemic in India, social structures, impact, and responses. So, why I chose this topic, I would dwell into that a little bit because I lost someone very close to me during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just wanted to study the last pandemic that happened in India in order to process my loss and understand the wrath of pandemics, what pandemics actually do to the society. So, after a very brief research revealed that India was the worst affected country during the 1918 pandemic, accounting for nearly 50% of the global deaths. 20 million out of the 40 million people died globally. Despite this, it remains largely absent from the popular memory and was not a significant part of the nationalistic discourse as well. This led to the pressing question: did the forgetfulness of the 1918 pandemic contribute to history repeating itself during the COVID-19? With the memory of 1918 so blurred, did India lose its valuable history the 1918 pandemic had to offer? The lack of awareness and discourse around the 1918 pandemic may have prevented India from drawing from the past experiences, potentially impacting its preparedness and response to COVID-19. This realization intrigued me further, leading me to seek answers to certain questions. So I investigated and turned to the Times of India archives. Having said that, I wondered around a lot of questions. What was the origin of the disease? How did it enter India? What was its regional, social, cultural, and economic impact throughout India? And what was the response of the British Indian government at that time? So, before starting my paper, I would like to give a little fun fact. I don't know how fun it is, but the origin of the word influenza. Influenza was not a new disease, it was as old as the 16th century. The word influence in the 17th century was attributed by the Italians to the influence of stars. The word influence is used here in an astronomical sense, referring to an ethereal fluid that was believed to have flowed from the stars that affected the actions of men. Moreover, influenza is one such rare disease that did not travel from the east to west, but rather traveled from the west to east, unlike the popular opinion. Moving on, the origin of the disease. The influenza disease, popularly known as the Spanish flu, is actually believed to have its roots in Cancas in American disease, the misleading name. The influenza disease, popularly known as the Spanish flu, is actually believed to have its roots in Cancas, is American Midwest, where it first appeared in the early 1918. By August 1918, it had reached Europe, Asia, and Africa. The naming of the flu as the Spanish flu was the result of the wartime censorship. Spain was a non-aggressive nation in which the press was not subject to the same degree of censorship as other nations involved in the war. Thus, Spain became the first country to announce the presence of the disease, shifting the entire blame from the United States to Spain, popularly known as the Spanish flu. Coming back to India, let's rewind the clock to the 1918. Now, this was a period of World War I, and the disease entered India through the soldiers of World War I. The disease popularly came to be known as the war fever. The British and the Indian soldiers were not only the main victims of the disease, but they were also the main transmitting agent. The disease from the soldiers spread to the bazaars, markets, laborers, and affected both the domestic as well as the European population. Influenza in India. The most commonly cited account that gives us a glimpse into the Indian experience of the influenza pandemic is a preliminary report of influenza published in 1919, drafted by Major Norman White, the Sanitary Commissioner under the Government of India. He himself quotes, "It would appear that no country suffered as severely as did India during the last quarter of 1918. According to his estimate, which he admits was based on incomplete information, he places the death toll for British India at around 5 million. After that, the report was never completed and it's silent about the number of deaths that went from 6 million, around 5 million to 20 million. Moving on, we see a lot of unimaginable laws or various as things happening at different parts of the country. I would quote certain things. Some are misinformation, some are personal memoirs citing what was the disease actually doing in different parts of the country. For example, in Punjab, it was believed that the postal services were spreading the disease. With letters and parcels changing hands, medical experts argued that the postal peons acted as disseminating agents. Rural areas witnessed the arrival of the disease with the immigrants that were returning from the big cities. Moving on to the Rajputana region. In the Rajputana region, it is believed that it lost around 10% of its population. Coming down towards the Gujarat region, there was a folklore that recalls entire villages being depopulated and times when dead bodies were so high in number that they were thrown off a cliff. Coming a little upwards toward the Kumaon region, in Kumaon region, Jim Corbett in his account in 1918 mentions that during the epidemic, corpses were dumped in the jungle for want of any other means of disposing them. So the leopards in that region developed the taste of the human flesh and they became man-eaters. Therefore, Jim Corbett was further called into Kumaon region to hunt those man-eaters and laid the foundation of what we today know as the Jim Corbett National Park or the Rajaji National Park. A personal memoir of Lakshmi Bai's Shri Miti Chitre, I'm sorry for the pronunciation if I'm pronouncing it wrong. She describes the influenza pandemic to be the worse than the plague. And she quotes, "In a family of 10, only one remained standing." The disease was followed by a drought and scarcity of food to such an extent that stories of a penniless man selling his cow in exchange of 2 pomegranates were heard. Kailash Nath Karju, in his autobiography, Experiments in Advocacy, also mentions it was a very terrible scourge. In 6 weeks, it was estimated 6 million people died of it. It made no distinction between the rich and the poor, prince and the peasant, men and women. It swept the whole country like a wildfire, and the number of persons who suffered from the disease must have exceeded crores. In the Calcutta region, another nuance that emerged from the disease was that women were dying more. The mortality rate of women was more than that of men. And this was primarily because women, one of the reasons for this cited by the Calcutta health officer was the Parda system, as women were deprived of fresh air. So disease were catching them more. Post this, there are certain statistics that actually tell what was the regional impact of the disease. In Sholapur district, here you can see that in September 1917, the mortality rate is 2,500. However, in the next year, 1918, the mortality rate has increased to 6,60,838. This is just one district. In an editorial, a person remarks, each of the Deccan districts of Nasik, East Khandesh, Ahmednagar and Satara lost as many men in 1 month from one disease, that is influenza, as were lost in the city of Bombay during the whole year 1918 from all the diseases. As Sir talked in his introduction about the psychological effect of a disease, this was a poem that I found in the Times of India archives. It is a poem that is written by a father to his child, where he compares the disease to a demon. And he quotes, and I would read a few lines, the last few lines of the poem. But it would be, if you doubt that the father is telling to his child, but if you doubt what I have told you about, wonder if it's true. I have seen and been caught by the beast myself, and its name is the gripper flu. And if you like, you may meet him someday. But I think I'd rather you kept as far away as you could. The father warns his child that as soon as you see the demon that comes knocking to your door, he must scream, shriek, and call for help. That was the effect of the pandemic, that everybody was seeing it as a demon. Moving on, we read to the case study of Bombay, as Bombay was a city from where the disease actually entered India. We find a statement of Dr. Kasavji Dada Chandji, the president of Bombay Medical Union, who actually questioned the port health officer who was responsible for checking up the soldiers who were coming in. The port health officer, however, misdiagnosed the disease. He diagnosed it as a sandfly fever. And a lot of people of the medical union wanted action to be taken against the port health officer. However, the port officer was later found to be innocent of any guilt of neglect. Since there was no statute, or as we were aware, instruction which made it compulsory upon the port health officer to report the sanitary authorities of the city of the existence of the disease of influenza or sandfly fever of ships entering the harbour. So the person who was actually responsible of misdiagnosing it was left without any charge upon him. Ramana states in her paper that the influenza pandemic broke out in Bombay city in June 1918, when 7 police sepoys were admitted to hospital with non-malarial fever, because India for a long period of time had been witnessing small epidemics of various diseases that included plague itself. Plague, malaria, cholera, all these were already prevalent in India. However, when actually someone was admitted for non-malarial diseases, it knocked on everyone's head what disease is it. It hit Bombay in 2 phases. The first phase, in a short period of time, it costed the city over 1,600 lives, at least 1 million working days, and an incalculable amount of discomfort, expense, and inconvenience. In the second wave, it has been quoted in the Times of India that between the 10th of September and the 10th of November, the mortality exceeded the normal by 14,678. In another letter to the editor, someone had remarked that the year 1919 will close in Bombay over the graves of 75,000 human beings. Dr. John Turner, Municipal Health Officer of Bombay, proposed the idea of setting up roadside dispensaries in Bombay. Now, these dispensaries would open at 2 times during a day and would use to supply certain medicines and check up on the of the patients. Turner's appeal was for the public assistance was answered in many ways. He also appealed to the public to come forward, volunteer, because there were mass number of cases that were being reported, and multiple volunteer groups sprang up in the region. It has been pointed out that at least 200 volunteers were provided by 25,000 organizations. Some of the notable organizations were the Medical Indian Association, the Parsi Emergency Corps, God Saraswat Brahmin Mitra Mandal, Young Men's Hindu Association. The Social Service League was also one of such organizations. Dr. Nerukar, The superintendent of municipal vaccination department was responsible for overseeing the volunteer work. The volunteers were entrusted to make house visits, determine where cases existed, persuade patients to visit hospitals, or provide medicines if patient cannot go to the hospital. Free milk was also supplied from the municipal dispensaries. A jacket known as the pneumonia jacket was supplied to fever patients by the health department to combat the cold. However, the mortality peaked in Bombay Presidency in October. It was reported rivers became clogged with corpses because firewood was not available or was available in insufficient amount for the cremation of Hindus. Bal Gangadhar Bal Gangadhar Tilak, in his weekly Kesari, had pointed out that a little amount of medical assistance was available to the people in the big cities. However, what would have been happening to the people who are there in the villages? As the disease was spreading like a wildfire, there was no amount of relief that was available to the people in the villages at that time. And he had actually questioned the government on this in his weekly. One of the letters that the governor of the Bombay Presidency wrote to his seniors, in which the cattle were dying because fodder was being exported to the soldiers outside. The disease was not alone killing people at that time. There was also an acute famine because of failure of rainfall at that time. The monsoon was not good. So he had quoted that since we are lucky that the Bombay Chronicle Press, or the Bombay Chronicle, the famous newspaper of that time, have not tumbled upon the fact that we are, even at this point of hour, at a point of famine, at a point of disease, are actually exploiting the Indian people and sending the fodder that is meant for the cattle or for the people to the military that is fighting for the British purpose. They were actually, the governor had quoted that we are lucky enough that the Bombay Chronicle Press has not tumbled upon this fact. So there were a lot of measures that were taken by the Bombay Municipal Organization at that time. Medical leaflets were distributed in Marathi or English. Okay? Schools and colleges were also shut. The headmasters or mistress of the schools were asked to maintain a stock of quinine pills for the staff and the pupils. Now, quinine pill was a medicine that was actually being distributed at that time as a cure for the influenza. We come across a lot of precautions that were asked for people to be taken off. Now, these are the list of precautions that I've found at different newspaper articles, and I would mention a few of them. For example, gargling, spraying the nose, keep away from crowded spaces, situations such as fair, festivals, theaters, and schools. If infected, rest in a separate room. Nurses or people in contact with infected patients were asked to use veils or masks and wash their hands afterwards. A lot of this that I'm telling, I believe that it would be giving a deja vu kind of feeling, because most of these things we were asked to do even in the times of COVID. At the end of my presentation, I would try to link these things with what we were doing in COVID. Moving forward, I do found a lot of interesting advertisements at that time, and I hope they are visible. These are different medicines that were being advertised at that time, and they were giving a very different kind of information. For example, here you can see free influenza cured in one day. Like an epidemic that was killing millions of people in one, we were curing it in one day. These are advertisements by different companies of various medicines. And this was really interesting to stumble upon these advertisements. Coming on to the government response, the mystery of the malady. Though the government response was slow, nevertheless, it was a British government. It was not supposed to take care of the people. It was a colonial government. So the response in itself was very slow. The first challenge in the response that I stumbled upon was that there was no counting of cases. There was no mechanism how to register cases. or if I am infected with a certain disease, I could not go, and there was no medical professionals, there were no hospitals at that time that were actually making statistics of the disease. Moreover, the British were less interested in moderating or controlling the price necessities. The British thought that they were congratulating themselves that they have not let the situation to a certain extent that a famine in the country has been created. We have controlled the price of certain things, and we think we should congratulate ourselves. And the people who were dying from the disease was another matter. They were congratulating themselves. And even in terms of price control, they were doing minimum efforts. For example, blankets का price बहुत ज़्यादा उस time पे बढ़ गया था, and blankets was something that was needed by people to secure the patient, because fever जब high जाता है influenza में तो normally ठंड लगती है, and that is why blankets were required. But blankets का hoarding हो रहा था, and there was no efforts taken by the British government to actually control those prices. SB Upasani raised the issue of the funding of relief measures in the Bombay Legislative Councils and sought answers regarding the efforts that were taken by the government. He received the answers that the government of India have appointed a food commissioner who will regulate inter-provisional supply. Moreover, the government of India have prohibited the export of wheat, except the support of military forces. At that time, if we carefully analyze, the major export that was happening from India was for military purposes. And if we are not banning the export for military purposes, we are not banning the export at all. So the Indian soldiers were made for a British cause at the cost of Indian civilians. Our people were dying at the border front, fighting for the British. Our people were dying in India, lack of medical professionals. While the Surgeon General claimed that they have done everything in their power to combat the medical epidemic, the press did not think so. As I told that they were already scared, Bombay Chronicle was one of the papers that was publicly criticizing the government. They had said that the officials remained in the hills during the time of emergency. They did not even bother to come down and see what was actually happening at the ground level. A sanitary commissioner confessed, and I quote him, the epidemic was regarded with apathy and skepticism by the vast majority of the medical profession. One of the reasons for which actually the government, or the British government, I would say, was skeptical in responding towards the influenza epidemic was their experience with the plague epidemic that had broken out in the city of Bombay during the 1890s and 1880s. During the plague epidemic, the state adopted extraordinary measures to contain the disease. The measures included body searches of travelers, demolishing infected houses, burning their contents, segregating possible contacts, carrying suspected cases off to the hospital, and creating innumerable plague hospital in evacuation camps. This invited widespread public backlash from the government to take a step backwards, giving way to Indian volunteers and intermediaries, even at the expense of rising plague cases. One of the instances here we can remember is the Chepkar brothers assassinating one of the plague officers, officers who were doing that. It is important to note that the British were far less affected by the epidemic in India, since they left they lived in big houses with fewer people and could afford medical care by employing household staff to look after them in the times of sickness. The spread of the flu wildfire, like a wildfire, by a lot of officers has been attributed to the conditions in India. For example, overcrowding, other insanitary conditions like dirt, filth, lack of proper sanitation facilities were seen as responsible factors for ruining the vitality of the people. Another related fact to this exaggerated situation of influenza in India was the diversion of Indian medical service officers to the war front. the Indian medical officers at that time were merely 700, a number already very low for a country like India, and those 700 was also diverted to the war front rather than for them to cater the needs of the civilians who were actually in distress. Some of these officers had not returned yet and to their civilian duties by 1918, and others had lost their lives. A small effort here was done by the government was to put the Royal Army Medical Corps into routine hospital work. However, these new doctors were neither aware of the local population or the disease. In Gujarat, it has been pointed out that in Gujarat there was a local vernacular paper local that had mentioned that large amount of quinine, as I had mentioned earlier, was a medicine for cure of this was being hoarded. Now here we can actually draw a parallel to the remdesivir being hoarded during the COVID-19. Remdesivir was being sold for lakhs, 2 lakhs for one or two जो टैबलेट का पूरा स्ट्रिप होता है वो 1-2 लाख में बिक रहा था उस वक्त, इतना होड़ हो चुका था. A decade right, another vernacular paper wanted Indian medicines to be encouraged. The paper has actually written that in the absence of medical aid, it was believed that Indian medicines should be encouraged and they would help to cope up with the situation. It quoted that since the medicines are so costly, or the European medicines were so costly and rare, and besides their dependence of the supply of medicines were coming from a very far off place. So Indian medicines could be used to at least create a situation that was as a precautionary step, Indian medicines could be used. Another article must that the large number of people that were dependent on medical on the Western medicine were very few. The Western medicine had entered India. However, the people who were actually dependent on the Western medicine were very few. However, Indian medicine was widely prevalent in India at that time. So it could be used as a precaution and as a cure as well at that time. Moving forward, we see that why is the pandemic being regarded as a forgotten pandemic? Why is it that even in our books, in our textbooks, that it finds a very minute mention, and in most of the textbook it does not even find a mention. Being a student of history, I do not remember studying the major books and reading about the 1918 pandemic, because other pandemics, other instances like the Jallianwala Bagh instance actually led to the killing of around 1,500 people, and it finds a mention of each and every nationalistic discourse. However, a pandemic that led to the loss of lives of around 2 crore people does not find a mention. So, comparing the past to the why is it a forgotten pandemic? First is the lack of documentation. As I mentioned earlier, there is no official report on the influenza pandemic by the government at that time. There was only one report, that is the Norman White's preliminary report is the sole document that was followed up. That was not even followed up. And a few chota annual reports by sanitary commissioners. And the actual death toll came to be known only when the census were done in 1921 and the census report got published in 1923 that there is a population of 2 crore that is being missing. And why did they got missing is not even recorded. Second, I think the reason for why the influenza pandemic got overshadowed was because of the World War I and the priorities of nationalism at that time. It was a period when Mahatma Gandhi was rising to power, prominence, and with his ideals of truth and satyagraha. The 1919 was the period the Rowlatt Bill was introduced, and within April, I suppose the Jallianwala Bagh happened within a month on 13th April. So the entire thing got overshadowed. An instance that how forgotten the pandemic is can be found from one of the articles of one of the we can find in the Jawaharlal Nehru's biography. In his biography, Nehru has dedicated an entire chapter to the Jallianwala Bagh, but there is no mention to the 1918 pandemic. It just vanished. This is one of the pictures that I found. It is not of India. This is of America, but this is one of the rare pictures that I found of the 1918 pandemic. And primarily, it is not that in India, इससे पहले के pandemics के pictures recorded नहीं हैं. They are recorded. However, during this pandemic, the extent of it was so high that even the photographers were sick. So there are no photographs of the pandemic and all. This is one rare picture of America that I found, that how patients were treated at that time. And if we actually draw a parallel to this picture as well, so if we imagine how hospitals were filled with beds during the COVID-19, we find a lot of similarity from this picture. Now, I would like to, as I've mentioned a lot of things about what was happening in 1918. So there was a lockdown, a chota sa lockdown, जिसमें schools and colleges were closed. People were precautioned, do not go into theaters or festivals or any crowded places. Now, this gives like a deja vu, as I mentioned earlier. And I would compare a lot of these steps were taken by the Indian government in the 2020 pandemic. However, these were something I don't think so that these are lessons that we actually drew from the 1918 pandemic, because this is how pandemics work. So when the counter pandemic situation works, however, India did not drew its inspiration from India itself. There were other countries as well who had dealt with the pandemic. From there, we did learn our lessons. However, this silent or the forgotten chapter of the 1918 pandemic is something that we really, and I've mentioned a few steps that we were taken during the COVID-19 pandemic and parallels. For example, the nationwide lockdown, the shortage and hoarding of medical supply, remdesivir I also mentioned earlier. Food shortage would have affected India at a very large scale during 2020, but we did successfully counter that situation with the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana and the One Nation One Ration Card scheme that was very swiftly adopted to ensure that free ration is distributed to all the migrant workers and the people who are below poverty line. And with respect to the tradition medicine, in earlier also we found that in some of the vernacular papers were actually promoting traditional medicines. Even during the COVID-19 period, Ministry of Ayush was promoting these medicines as a precautionary measures or immunity boosters like kada, haldi, giloy, tulsi, ashwagandha. Even these were the things that actually had prices इनके भी बहुत ऊपर चले गए थे उस time पे, because giloy and ashwagandha was something everybody was running after. So this is how pandemics के साथ, even sir ने अपने introduction में यही बोलता, this is how we have to learn from pandemics. India के साथ यही problem रही that entire chapter got silent. We never got to know it. For example, in Europe had witnessed Black Death. After Black Death, Europe has been very skeptical of any epidemic or any pandemic, and they try to contain it as less and at a less population as possible. So India, therefore, I would just conclude that yes, we did lose our certain lessons while dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, but after the COVID-19 pandemic, I don't think so. If ever in 100 years or in a global world, maybe even less, if we get another pandemic, because that is the reality of today's world, and a lot of people say that it is going to be a bio war, the next war. However, I believe that we have gathered enough lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic to go further and just remember these lessons, how to deal with the pandemic in future. And we won't be this lost when dealing with this another time, because there is a sufficient amount of sources, official data, and social media was there this time. So everything has been recorded in such a manner कि ये mistake तो अब repeat नहीं होगी. जो हो गया वो ठीक है. 1918 was a British government, वो हम record नहीं कर पाए, that was lax government response था. But I believe this is something that is going to remain in our hearts, then how to deal with the pandemic. And at the end, I would just like to mention the references that I took for my talk, and I would like to conclude my talk on the references. I did use a lot of papers like Chinmay Tumbe's book, The Age of Pandemics, David Arnold's The Death in the Modern Empire, the 1918 and 1919 influenza epidemic, and the others that are being mentioned on the screen. And I conclude my talk here. Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Ashna, for a most detailed and researched talk on such a topic we could ever have. And such topics like pandemics and epidemics are never being discussed, but by discussing them, we could really lead us to some really good precautions and actions. So, thank you so much for that discussion.
I think some network issues from Salim's side. So now this is what Asna, that we are having two questions for you. Salim, return back. Okay, so we are having two questions for you, and after that, one popular question by moderator. So, I think Manthan is asking how effective are public health measures such as quarantine, travel restrictions, or mass burials. So, what do you think about that? Any evidence? I don't think so. That the evidence was there of 1918, but it's your question, so you better say something. And the second question would be, what role did Indian medical doctors or practitioners and traditional medicine play in combating the pandemic? So these two are the questions from the viewer side. So Asna, over to you. A brief answer of all these two questions. Yeah.
So, with respect to the Indian medicines, I believe there is a lot of debate around it. I cannot give one right, black or white answer. The answer somewhere lies in the gray. The Indian medicines, even during the 1918 pandemic, I do find mentions of Indian medicines being promoted. Even Gandhi ji were telling in his letters to people, he himself at that time was very sick. And even his son has lost his wife and his child during the pandemic, and he had said कि इतनी news हर जगह से आ रही है that it is making me indifferent. So in a lot of letters there have been find even mentioned by Mahatma Gandhi कि Indian medicines का use करना चाहिए. And on a personal belief, on a personal level, I feel what I witnessed in the COVID-19 also was that the traditional medicines acted as excellent immunity boosters, as the very nature of Indian medicine is that it acts very slowly. With respect to allopathy, अगर हम देखें, allopathy gives instant relief. Ayurvedic is not dependent. Ayurvedic builds upon slowly. So Ayurveda, even in the COVID-19 pandemic, was very beautifully used and promoted by the government as well, and a lot of other people, as well as the WhatsApp University, to actually as an immunity booster. While it may not be curing people, however, it was a good immunity booster. And secondly,
Okay.
on the
Yeah.
question of the masks and everything, the quarantine and that wala thing, I believe in the initial time it was important because it becomes important to do in the initial phase of the of the outbreak of the disease, because at that time it is important to control numbers. When it is a new disease, you do not know how to deal with it. So it is important that the numbers are controlled. Once you get to know that yes, these are the steps that have to be taken, even if even if the population is getting the disease, you know how to deal with it. And eventually, if a large even during the COVID-19 pandemic, we read about a theory in which if the 50% population actually contracts the disease, they get the immunity of it because of the antibodies that are created by the human body itself. So
Okay, Asna, perfect. It's a really interesting topic. And one of the last question that moderator would ask if they are here, if Salendra is here. So they will ask that what's your experience with the GSTS platform? So when you got interacted with the one of moderators, and after that we had a meetings. So give us a sense about your interaction with the GSTS.
Sir, I believe the GSTS platform was very cooperative and very encouraging. I myself was a little nervous कि I have to give a paper talk in front of so many people. However, the team was very encouraging. We had a pre-meet, and in the pre-meet itself, as I did okay in the pre-meet, I was saying like, you're doing well, and it was encouraging. They were cooperative, and they were also very prompt in answering. Even if I had any doubt, they were prompt in clearing my doubts. And on a whole, I believe it is a great platform which provides us young scholars to just present our work in a very informal and a very chill manner, I would say.
Okay, Asna, thank you very much. Wonderful having in this platform, and kindly connect others like you, because I have so many applications right now, but at least people with the interesting topics. So kindly connect some young scholars. Okay, so it's time for the guest of honor. So Dr. Rishikesh, it's for the 5 minutes. It's your time. So go ahead, give us a sense about the. It's not about the topic. It's about the platform. It's about the how Asna presented herself, etc., etc. So it's a little bit fun. It's not a very serious
Yes,
understanding.
yes,
Okay, Dr. Rishikesh, yeah.
yes, sir. So first of all, Ashna, your presentation was fantastic, and you include. I really appreciate you include so much primary sources and so much interesting pictures. Your presentation was well articulated also, and you start your presentation with the meaning of what this influenza. This was new to me, and also you also talk about the origin of disease. All was fantastic. I really appreciate. But yes, I include few points. Uh, the first point is the what is this? What was this influenza? So as a student of geology, this is a virus, but because when in 1918 this pandemic came, nobody knows that this is a virus which was causing this Spanish flu, but it was thought that it was a hemophilus influenza bacteria which was causing this disease, a Spanish flu. But later, after 12 years of this pandemic in 1930, first time people know that no, this was not a bacteria, it was a virus. So it is a virus, and it has surface protein like this. Like it has surface protein like H protein, N protein, and there are different type of proteins present on the surface. Like 18 variant of H protein are present. This red one is H protein, and 11 variant of this N protein are present. So based on the combination which protein are present on the virus, it is named. Like H1, N1 is the protein which is present on this virus. Later, different variants are also came later, like H2N2, H5N3, avian flu, Hong Kong flu, and many more. So this was a bit introduction of this virus. Additionally, I also uh, give a point of view for this disease in a global view, because in 1980 India was a colony of Britishers, right? So जब ब्रिटिशर्स यहाँ पे आते हैं, या जब कहीं कभी भी कॉलोनियलिज्म होता है या इंपीरियलिज्म होता है, तो उस टाइम पे केवल कल्चरल एक्सचेंज नहीं होता, केवल वहां पे इकोनॉमिकल एक्सचेंज नहीं होता, हम हमेशा एक चीज को मिस करते हैं, दैट इज इकोलॉजिकल एक्सचेंज. Ecological exchange of microbes, ecological exchange of species, different species, like we talk about invasive species, exotic species. So जब भी एक जगह से दूसरी जगह पीपल माइग्रेट करते हैं, लाइक कोलंबस ने जब डिस्कवर करा था अमेरिका, जब वो वहां पे गया, तो नॉट ओनली ही ओनली वेंट देयर फॉर गोल्ड, फॉर ग्लोरी, है ना, वहां पे वो अपने साथ साथ कुछ बहुत सारी डिजीजेस भी लेके गया, और वहां से डिजीज लेके आया, लाइक लॉट ऑफ सेक्सुअली ट्रांसमिटेड डिजीज लाइक सिफिलिस, गोनोरिया, एटसेट्रा ऑल. सो जब भी कॉलोनियलिज्म होता है, इंपीरियलिज्म होता है, तो वहां पे ये डिजीज मूव करते हैं, वहां पे स्प्रेड ऐसे होती हैं ये डिजीजेस. ऑल्सो climate change is the major factor in the spreading of disease, these kind of diseases. Like एक ऑर्गेनिज्म है, उसको एक ऐसे एनवायरनमेंट पे रहना पसंद है, फॉर एग्जांपल किसी माउंटेन पे रहना पसंद है जहाँ का टेम्परेचर 20 टू 25 डिग्री सेंटीग्रेड है. बट ड्यू टू क्लाइमेट चेंज, जब उससे ऊपर वाले माउंटेन का टेम्परेचर वो वैसा हो जाएगा, तो दिस माइक्रो ऑर्गेनिज्म इट विल इन्वेड दैट प्लेस. So we should protect our forest. We should think about our ecology. We should think about our environment. So because these are also the factor which are responsible for the moving of these kind of diseases. And also in your presentation you was talking about the documentation, lack of documentation. But I think the politics of documentation was there, because कई बार गवर्नमेंट ऐसा भी करती है, अगर कोविड का एक्चुअल या इन्फ्लुएंजा का एक्चुअल डाटा दिखा तो लोगों में एंजाइटी हो जाएगी, लोग डर जाएंगे, स्ट्रेस हो जाएगा, वहां पे साइकोलॉजी चेंज हो जाएगी लोगों की. सो इट इज पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ रिकॉर्ड, पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ डॉक्यूमेंटेशन. एंड rest your talk was very fantastic, and as a person from zoology background, I really learned a lot from your talk. Thank you so much. And thank you, Manish sir, for inviting me. And I would also like to thank Principal Sir, Professor Nachiketa Singh, Shyam Lal College, IQAC convener Dr. Pramod Kumar Dwivedi, guest convener Dr. DN Singh, guest founder and advisor Dr. Manish sir is not only we not only connected with this platform, but also we are Dr. Manish sir is alumni of our hostel. So thank you sir for inviting me here.
Thank
And
you, thank you,
this
thank you.
this one is sir important, because किसी भी प्लेटफॉर्म को चलने के लिए एक सबसे एक कोर टीम की जरूरत होती है. your moderators are very hard working, and really I appreciate their hard work also, and I thank you to them all also. Thank you so much sir.
Yes, I know they are very hardworking, and thank you. This is my time now. So
Yes,
if
yes sir.
Salendra was there, so Salendra would be hand over the mic to me. So
Thank you for giving me
Yes,
brief introduction.
yes, yeah. Thank you, Rishikesh and Dr. Rishikesh and Ashna. So, but before this, I would like to invite few of my colleagues because time ticking out. But I'll invite one of my colleagues from Motilal Nehru College, and she'll give us a sense about this topic talk. And so, two of colleague I would like to invite, and after that, wrap up round. So, I would like to invite Dr. Sonal. Are you here? So, can you give us a
I'm here.
sense about?
Am I
Yeah,
audible?
yeah. Yes, you are audible. Yeah.
Okay, Ashna, thank you for this very interesting talk. And as you are getting into the history of pathogens and medicines, I think you are unintentionally touching upon the theoretical premise of history as a dialogue between the present and the past, where the COVID pandemic generated a huge interest among the historians with respect to the history of pandemics itself. And during the COVID pandemic, the entire history, if you delve deeper into the research, you will realize that there is a lot of historical research which has been done into pandemics, not just the COVID, but prior to this, when there was the Ebola virus breakup, when and how a pandemic is termed to be a pandemic. Because remember, the World Health Organization emerged in the 20th century internationalism. So, a pandemic becomes a very specific terminology as to when a disease spread over a large geographical area becomes a pandemic and when it cannot be categorized as a pandemic. So, a dialogue between the present and the past. And I think that COVID 19 actually is a very interesting point here. And you'll be surprised to know that the amount of research that has been done in this domain. So, while you were referring to the paucity of sources with respect to the Spanish flu, In fact, there is a lot of material, and I would encourage you to turn towards literature. For instance, Sharat Chand Chattopadhyay's Shrikant, he refers to the plight of the people who are traveling to Burma via boat and, via the sea. And because the flu had spread, they were quarantined and nobody knew the term. And just as all of us have been witness to the bureaucratic procedure of getting a permit to enter into certain areas, similar was the case in the case of colonial travel between colonial Calcutta and Burma. So you might want to enter into the domain of how the state takes over the management of epidemics. Okay, this is very crucial because remember the fundamental difference between the 2019 pandemic and the all other prior to 2019 epidemics or pandemics, be it the plague or the Spanish flu and so on, is that never ever there was nationwide lockdowns. There were city-wise, sector-wise, but nationwide lockdowns were the first time in the 21st century, and this was a result of the World Economic Forum's, dress rehearsal of how to deal with future pandemics a year before. So the modern state and modern international organization have been adapting themselves to deal with diseases of these scale. So not just Shrikant, you might also be interested in reading Suryakant Tripathi Nirala's Kulli Bhat, जिसमें वो गंगा में जब स्पेनिश फ्लू के दौरान हमने कोविड-19 में भी सुना है कि कैसे लाशें नदियों में बहाई जा रही थी क्योंकि क्रिमेटोरियम्स भरे हुए थे. ये आपको स्पेनिश फ्लू के दौरान भी ऐसे किस्से मिलते हैं. एंड देयर वाज दिस वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग स्टोरी इन्फ्लुएंजा की चुड़ैल कि एंड ये कहानी बहुत इट इमर्जेस अगेन एंड अगेन हर संदर्भ में जहां आपको ब्यूरोक्रेटिक प्रक्रियाओं पे शायद हास्यास्पद अप्रोच भी आप ले सकते हैं, बट मानवीय त्रासदी पर आपको रोना भी आ सकता है कि जहां एक महिला की मौत मानी जाती है क्योंकि उसको वो पैंडेमिक से ग्रसित है और उसको डेड मान के गंगा में बहा दिया जाता है और वो मरी नहीं होती है, और जब वो जिंदा होकर वापस आती है तो उसे चुड़ैल माना जाता है. There is a fear of both being contracting the disease as well as the fear of how can that woman come back because men have further other prospects besides that particular woman. What I'm trying to tell you, Ashna, I can go on giving you a whole lecture, but I think you are headed in the right direction. But instead of looking at the medical records, you will find a lot more interesting avenues of entry points if you turn towards literature and to compare the 21st century bureaucratic setup with the prior to 21st century bureaucratic setup. And finally, me being a historian, the dialogue that you are trying to build between the present and the past, that because in the present there has been an instance of epidemic, there has been a surge of researchers to look at what were the past epidemics and how the states dealt with, how societies were affected with. My final point, as far as the indigenous medicine system and the allopathic system is concerned, you again might want to turn towards the history of the entrance of the liberal economy in the domain of healthcare, especially from the end of 19th century with the emergence of the patent system, which gave a huge fillip to the allopathy system. So it's not that indigenous medicine systems were not being practiced, but because there is a commercialization and support of a market economy, people turn towards the efficacy of these more than those indigenous medicine systems which had not been advertised, commercialized, or endorsed by private practitioners of allopathic system. So in a nutshell, I'm trying to be brief. Manish sir, I hope I have not exceeded the time that I have been allocated. But I believe, Ashna, I have sent you some pointers to look into.
Yes, ma'am. It was
Thank
a
you.
beautiful
Yes.
insight.
Yes, yes, Sonal. That's why I invited you, and because she's a very young
No, I
scholar,
am glad.
and
It's always an honor, Manish sir. And पिछले कितने सेशन से हम मिस कर रहे थे because
और yes, एक बात और भी मिस कर रहे हैं. I want to invite you in lunch with someone else, and वो भी बात अभी बाकी है. So definitely we'll
बिल्कुल सर आप
connect.
हुकुम
Yes,
करें.
we'll connect. Thank you. And we're
Definitely आप
very
हुकुम करें
yes.
sir.
Yes, yes, and we connect to one of my colleague, Vatsal Singh from Shyam Lal Evening College. After that, Akriti, and now I'm wrap up. Vatsal, are you here? If you want to say something from Shyam Lal Evening College. Okay, maybe some technical issues. Akriti, from Department of History, Shyam Lal Evening College. So yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. So, Ashna, it was a very interesting talk. Thank you so much for enlightening us on this topic. And
And
yeah,
Akriti, why not you give a vote of thanks? Because it's your college. I'm already the guest appearance. So it's all about you. Time is ticking out. So, and thank you very much, Rishikesh and Asna from my side. It's a wonderful evening. Though the World Cup Champions Trophy match is going on, but why Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma become Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma? They they are playing, not the watching cricket. So what as a student and a teacher we are doing, we are here, we are doing. So this is only request, वो इतने बड़े प्लेयर ऐसे बने, वो खेल के बने, देख के नहीं बने. So what is a student's work? हम लोग उसका रिकैप देख लेंगे, उसका जो आता है वो देख लेंगे. But this is a more important for a scholar and for a teacher and for a student. So over to you, Akriti, for vote of thanks and wrap up this whole event.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much. So, as I was saying, it was a very interesting talk, Ashna. Thank you. And I actually like 2 points, which actually one was pointed out by Rishi, that was the impact of colonialism and imperialism. And the second was very important, actually, what Sonal actually said, because I'm also using literature in my research. So, literature is also very important to, you should push your boundaries toward these kind of material also, right? The archives, because only official archives and colonial archives are very limited. So it was really nice. So as a vote of thanks, I just want to thank you, Principal Shyam Lal Evening College, Professor Nachiketa Singh sir, IC in charge Pramod Divedi sir, and our TIC History Department, DN Singh sir. Thank you so much. And convener and advisor of this platform, the brain behind this platform was Manish sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Miss Himanshi Mehra, for providing us these young scholars. And thank you very much. Have a nice day. Take care. मिलते हैं फिर next Sunday. Okay. Thank you, and thank you, moderator, Mr. Rathor. I don't know where he is now. Very few times it was happened that मेरा moderator गायब हो जाते हैं. It's the first or second incident, but that's why I'm here as a founder, as a like advisor of the GSTS. Thank you, Asna. Thank you, Rishikesh. Have a nice day. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much, sir.
all.
Have a nice
Thank
day.
you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.